It was the kind of cold that didn't just freeze your skin, it froze your hope. Lizzie Harper had nothing left, no family, no pack. And after that night, no will to live. She was bleeding out in the middle of the unforgiving Yukon wilderness, running from a past that wanted her dead. But destiny has a twisted sense of humor. Just as she closed her eyes to accept her end, she heard a whimper, a sound that forced her to make one final fatal choice. She didn't know the wolf cub she was dying to save belonged to Kelsey Rourke, the most ruthless alpha king on the continent, and she certainly didn't know that by saving his heir, she had just started a war. Snow fell in sheets, thick and unrelenting, turning the world into a suffocating blanket of white. The wind screamed through the valley of Silver Creek, a sound that usually warned travelers to turn back, but Lizzie Harper kept moving. She didn't have the luxury of turning back. Blood soaked through the bandage improvised from the hem of her shirt, freezing against her side. The wound was deep, a parting gift from Derek, a man who had promised to love her, and instead tried to sell her to the highest bidder in the underground lichen fighting rings. Lizzie wasn't a wolf. She was human, fragile, and currently dying. 48 hours. That was how long she had been running. Her car had spun out on the icy switchbacks near the border, leaving her to flee on foot into the dense, ancient forest known as the Ironclad Territory. Her boots were worn, her jacket too thin for the sub-zero temperatures. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Lizzie stumbled her knees, hitting the hard-packed snow. The impact jarred her ribs, sending a fresh spike of agony through her torso. She coughed, seeing red droplets spatter against the pristine white ground. "Get up," she whispered to herself, though the voice sounded like a stranger's. "If you stop, you die." And Derek was behind her, maybe miles back, maybe just over the ridge. He was a tracker, a wolf who enjoyed the hunt. He wouldn't kill her quickly. He had too much money riding on her capture. She forced herself upright, using a frozen pine branch for leverage. That was when she heard it. It wasn't the howl of a hunting party. It was high-pitched, frantic, and filled with pain. A whimper. Lizzie froze. Survival instinct screamed at her to ignore it. She was bleeding out. She couldn't afford a detour. But the sound came again, a pitiful cry that cut through the howling wind. It sounded like a child. She shifted her course, dragging her left leg, which had gone numb hours ago. About 50 yards off the deer trail beneath the jagged overhang of a slate cliff, she saw the source. A wolf cub. It couldn't have been more than 6 months old, its fur a mix of charcoal and silver. It was thrashing violently, its rear leg clamped tight in the rusted jaws of an illegal bear trap. The metal teeth had dug deep, and the snow around the animal was stained a horrific crimson. Lizzie dropped to her knees beside the animal. The cub snarled, fear overriding its pain, snapping its small jaws at her face. "Easy," Lizzie rasped, her hands shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub's yellow eyes were wide with terror. It was alone. No pack would leave a cub this young unless they were dead or separated by force. Lizzie looked at the trap. It was old iron, heavy and rusted shut. To open it, she would need leverage and strength she didn't possess. She looked at her own wound, then at the cub. If she spent her energy here, she wouldn't make it to the highway. She would die in this clearing. The cub whimpered again, its head drooping onto the snow, exhausted. Lizzie gritted her teeth. She grabbed a thick, fallen branch, jamming it into the spring mechanism of the trap. "Okay, little one. On 3. She pushed. The metal groaned but didn't budge. Pain exploded in her side, her vision swimming with black spots. She screamed a raw, guttural sound and threw her entire body weight against the lever. Her wound tore open completely. She could feel the warm rush of blood down her hip, faster this time. Life was pouring out of her, channeling into the strength needed to depress the spring. Click. The jaws sprang open. Lizzie didn't let go of the lever. "Run!" she choked out. The cub scrambled backward, dragging its injured leg, whining. It didn't run away. It stopped 3 feet away and looked at her. Lizzie let the lever snap back. The branch shattered. She collapsed sideways into the snow, the adrenaline fading, instantly replaced by a cold so profound it felt like burning. She couldn't get up. Not this time. "Go," she whispered to the cub, her eyes fluttering shut. "Find your mom." The cub hobbled closer. It didn't leave. Instead, the small wolf curled up against her chest, pressing its warm fur against her freezing neck. It began to lick the tears freezing on her cheeks. Lizzie smiled faintly. At least she wouldn't die alone. Time lost its meaning. The snow began to bury them both. Lizzie's consciousness drifted into the grey void. She thought of her sister gone years ago. She thought of the warm coffee shop in Seattle where she used to work. Then the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the rhythmic, thundering impact of something massive approaching. Growls erupted from the tree line. Not the small whimpers of a cub, but the deep, chest-vibrating rumbles of apex predators. Lizzie forced her eyes open one last time. Through the blur of her eyelashes, she saw them. 3 massive wolves emerged from the blizzard. 2 were russet-colored, huge and bristling with aggression. But the one in the center was a monster. He was jet black, standing nearly at the height of a man's chest, even on all 4s. His eyes were not yellow, but a piercing electric blue that seemed to glow in the twilight. The alpha. The black wolf shifted. The sound of cracking bones echoed in the silence as the beast stood up and reformed into a man. He was terrifying. Standing well over 6 feet, naked to the waist, despite the blizzard steam rising from his broad shoulders. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Kelsey Rourke, alpha of the ironclad pack, had found the scent of blood near his missing nephew. He stalked toward her, the snow melting beneath his bare feet. The other 2 wolves flanked him, snarling. Lizzie couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She saw the man's eyes lock onto the cub curled on her chest, and then shift to the blood soaking the snow beneath her. He assumed the worst. Of course he would. A human, a trap, a bleeding cub. Kelsey dropped to his knees beside her, his hand wrapping around her throat. His grip was iron. "If he dies..." Kelsey's voice was a low growl that vibrated through her very bones. "Begging for death will be the only prayer you have left." Lizzie tried to shake her head to explain, but her lungs failed. The cub, sensing the aggression, let out a sharp bark and nipped at Kelsey's wrist. Kelsey froze. He looked at the cub, then at the open trap nearby, and finally at the branch shattered on the ground. He looked at Lizzie's side, where the blood wasn't coming from the cub, but from her. His blue eyes widened, the rage faltering for a split second, replaced by confusion. Lizzie's head lolled back. The last thing she felt was the crushing pressure on her throat, vanishing, replaced by massive, searingly hot arms, scooping her up from the frozen earth. "Hold on," the monster commanded. But Lizzie Harper had let go. The first thing Lizzie noticed was the smell. It didn't smell like pine and death anymore. It smelled like cedarwood antiseptic, and something rich and musky, like rain on hot pavement. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt like lead weights. A rhythmic beeping sound echoed to her left. A heart monitor. She shouldn't be alive, Kelsey. Her core temperature dropped to 82 degrees. She lost 3 pints of blood before we even got the line in. The voice was female, sharp, and clinical. "But she is alive," a deep voice responded. It was him, the voice from the snow. The vibration of it seemed to ripple through the bed she was lying on. "And she stays that way. We found traces of wolfsbane in her system, along with the physical trauma," the woman continued. "Someone didn't just want to hurt her. They wanted to slow her down so she couldn't run. Who is she? I don't know, but Toby hasn't left the foot of her bed in 2 days." Lizzie forced a groan past her dry lips. The voices stopped instantly. "Water," she rasped. A straw was pressed to her lips within a second. She drank greedily, the cool liquid, soothing the sandpaper feeling in her throat. She blinked her eyes open, the blurry shapes slowly sharpening into focus. She was in a room that looked less like a hospital and more like a luxury bedroom converted into an ICU. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, a massive stone fireplace roaring with flames and floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a dense, snow-covered forest. Sitting in a leather armchair next to the bed was the man from the blizzard. Kelsey Rourke was even more imposing dressed than he was naked. He wore a black Henley that strained against his chest and dark jeans. His features were sharp, aristocratic, but brutal, with a jawline that could cut glass and those same terrifying electric blue eyes watching her with predator-like intensity. At the foot of the bed, the charcoal wolf cub Toby was curled up on a velvet blanket. Upon hearing her voice, Toby's head popped up. He gave a happy yip and scrambled up the mattress, nuzzling into Lizzie's hand. "Easy, Toby," Kelsey warned, though his voice lacked the malice she remembered. "She's fragile." Lizzie flinched as Kelsey leaned forward. The movement was small but instinctual. Kelsey paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're afraid of me." "You choked me," Lizzie whispered, pulling the duvet higher up her chest. "I thought you were the poacher," Kelsey said, his tone flat, offering no apology. "I was wrong. You saved my nephew. The ironclad pack pays its debts." Lizzie looked around the room. "Where am I?" "You are in the Alpha's estate." "My home," Kelsey said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days? Derek. Panic surged through her. If she was here for 3 days, Derek would have tracked her scent. He never gave up. He was obsessive. "I have to go," Lizzie said, trying to sit up. Pain tore through her side, and the heart monitor accelerated its beeping. Beep, 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 beep. Kelsey was on his feet instantly, his hand pressing gently but firmly against her uninjured shoulder to push her back down. His skin was incredibly hot. "You aren't going anywhere," he commanded. "You have 30 stitches in your side and frostbite on your extremities. If you walk out that door, you'll collapse before you reach the gate." "He'll find me," Lizzie gasped, her eyes darting to the window. "You don't understand. He doesn't stop." Kelsey's expression darkened. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, charged with static. "Who?" Lizzie pressed her lips together. If she told him and Derek came, this pack would get hurt. Or worse, they would hand her hand her over to avoid a war. Derek was the beta of the Obsidian Shadow Pack, a pack known for its brutality and criminal connections. "It doesn't matter," Lizzie lied. "I just need to leave." Kelsey leaned in close, his face inches from hers. She could see the flecks of silver in his blue irises. He inhaled deeply near her neck, and Lizzie trembled. You smell of fear, Kelsey murmured. And you smell of another pack. Obsidian shadow. He pulled back his face, twisting in disgust. Are you one of Garrick's spies? Is that it? You set up the trap for the cub just to save him and gain entry. No. Lizzie cried out, the accusation stinging more than the wound. I didn't know who the cub was. I just saw a suffering animal. I'm not a spy. I'm running from them. The door to the room opened, and a woman in a white coat walked in. She had kind eyes and greying hair tied in a bun. This must be the healer. Alpha, your distress is in her, the woman chided gently. She checked the monitors. Her heart rate is spiking. Let her rest. Kelsey stood up to his full height, dwarfing everyone in the room. He looked at Lizzie with a mix of suspicion and something else, curiosity. My security team found your tracks, Kelsey said, his voice cold again. They also found the tracks of a large male wolf following you. He stopped at the border of my territory. Lizzie stopped breathing. He knows I'm here. He knows you crossed into ironclad land, Kelsey corrected. No one enters my estate without my permission, and no one takes what is mine. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the brass handle. He looked back at her, and for a moment his gaze dropped to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. You saved Toby. For that, you are under my protection. But if I find out you are lying to me, Lizzie Harper. He knew her name. How did he know her name? I will throw you back to the wolves myself. He slammed the door behind him. Lizzie sank back into the pillows, her heart hammering. She looked at Toby, who licked her hand comfortingly. Great, she whispered to the cub. I survived the cold only to land in the devil's living room. Outside the heavy oak door, Kelsey Rourke leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair. His beta, a scarred man named Rogan, approached. Well? Rogan asked. She's awake, Kelsey said. She's terrified. Is she a threat? Kelsey closed his eyes. When he had picked her up in the snow, when her blood had soaked onto his skin, he had felt a spark, a pull. It was faint, buried under the scent of sickness and the stench of the obsidian pack. But it was there. The mating bond. Fate had bound him to a human running from his worst enemies. Keep a guard on her door, Kelsey ordered, opening his eyes. They were glowing faintly. And double the patrols on the southern border. If any obsidian wolf crosses the line, kill them on sight. Understood. Rogan nodded. And the girl? What do we do with her once she heals? Kelsey pushed off the wall, walking toward his office. We find out why a human woman smells like she belongs to me. Recovery was a slow, agonizing process. For a week, Lizzie was confined to the guest wing of the Rourke estate, a sprawling Gothic mansion that felt more like a fortress than a home. She was treated with polite indifference by the staff-fed gourmet meals she was too anxious to eat, and watched constantly by stone-faced guards who stood outside her door. Toby the wolf cub was her only solace. He had refused to leave her side, sleeping at the foot of her bed, and growling at anyone who approached too quickly. On the 7th day, the cabin fever became unbearable. The stitches in her side pulled tight, but the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. Lizzie waited until the shift change of the guards, a 10-second window she had memorized, and slipped out of her room. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to know the layout. If Derek came for her, she needed an exit strategy. The hallways were lined with portraits of ancestors, grim men, with the same electric blue eyes as Kelsey. She turned a corner and found herself in a massive library, a 2-story room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. "You're out of bed." Lizzie spun around, gasping. Kelsey was standing by the fireplace, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He wasn't wearing the casual clothes from the sick room. He was in a tailored suit, the jacket discarded on a chair, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar to reveal the column of his throat. He looked exhausted and dangerous. "I needed to walk," Lizzie said, backing up until her hips hit a heavy oak table. "Am I a prisoner, Kelsey?" Kelsey took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes tracking her movement. "You are a loose end, Lizzie. There is a difference." He set the glass down and walked toward her. The air in the room seemed to compress. "I looked into your background. Lizzie Harper, waitress, orphan. No criminal record, no pack affiliation. And yet the beta of the Obsidian Shadow Pack has been camped on my southern border for 3 days, demanding your return." Lizzie's blood ran cold. "He's here. He says you stole something." Kelsey stopped 3 feet from her. "He says you are a thief and a fugitive. He is demanding I hand you over by the night of the winter solstice. That is 2 days from now." "I didn't steal anything," Lizzie said, her voice trembling. "Then why does he want you so badly that he is willing to risk a war with the ironclad kingdom?" Kelsey roared, his composure snapping. He slammed his hand onto the table beside her, boxing her in. "Tell me the truth. I cannot protect a liar." Lizzie looked up into his blazing eyes. She saw the conflict there. He wanted to trust her, but his duty to his pack came first. "I didn't steal," Lizzie whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I saw." Kelsey froze. "What did you see?" "I was dating him." Lizzie confessed, the shame burning her cheeks. "Derek." "I didn't know what he was. I didn't know about wolves. He was just charming. Possessive but charming. Then 3 weeks ago he took me to a cabin in the woods. He thought I was asleep in the car." Lizzie began to shake. "I saw him meet an older man. They argued. Derek turned into that thing, a wolf, and he tore the older man's throat out." Kelsey went rigid. "Describe the older man." "Tall, grey hair. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow." Kelsey cursed softly, backing away from her as if burned. "Halion. The alpha of Obsidian Shadow. The official report said he died of a heart attack." "Derek killed him," Lizzie said, her voice gaining strength. "He killed him to take power, but he didn't realize I was watching through the windshield. When he saw me, he smiled. He said now I belonged to him forever, because I held his life in my hands." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "If Garrick, the current acting alpha, finds out, Derek killed Halion." "Derek is a dead man," Kelsey mused, connecting the dots. "Derek isn't chasing a thief. He's chasing a witness." Kelsey looked at her with new eyes. The disgust was gone, replaced by a fierce, possessive intensity that made Lizzie's knees weak. He reached out his rough thumb, tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent a shock wave of heat through her body, so intense she gasped. Kelsey felt it too. His pupils dilated, swallowing the blue. "You are a human," he murmured, sounding confused and angry at the same time. "Why do you feel like home?" Lizzie held her breath. "Kelsey." He pulled his hand back sharply. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Do not come out until I come for you." "What are you going to do?" Kelsey turned to the fire, his silhouette stark against the flames. I am going to prepare for a war. The dress was silver, not just grey, but a shimmering liquid mercury silk that clung to every curve of Lizzie's body before pooling at her feet. Sloane, the young maid, assigned to Lizzie, tightened the laces at the back. You look like a queen, Miss Lizzie. Truly. Lizzie stared at herself in the mirror. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. The bruises had faded to faint yellow shadows, easily hidden by makeup. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate braid woven with silver threads. Why do I have to go to this? Lizzie asked, feeling like a lamb being dressed for slaughter. It is the winter solstice, Sloane said, stepping back to admire her work. The alphas from the 5 neighboring territories are coming to pay respects to the Alpha King. If Kelsey hides you, it looks like guilt. If he parades you, it looks like power. The door opened, and Kelsey entered. The air left the room. He was wearing a tuxedo, but on him it looked like armor. The black fabric emphasized the width of his shoulders and the dangerous grace of his movements. He wore the iron-clad crest, a wolf holding a sword pinned to his lapel in platinum. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes raked over her body, starting at her exposed neck, down the curve of her waist to the slit in the skirt. He didn't say a word, but the sudden flare of heat in the room spoke volumes. "Leave us," Kelsey commanded, without looking away from Lizzie. Sloane curtsied and fled. Kelsey walked toward her, the predator back in his gaze. He circled her slowly. "You clean up well, Lizzie." "I feel ridiculous," she muttered, tugging at the hem. "I'm a waitress, Kelsey, not a diplomat." "Tonight you are neither," Kelsey said, stopping behind her. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Tonight, you are mine." He placed a heavy necklace around her neck. It was made of raw diamonds and black steel. It was heavy gold and undeniably a collar. "This bears the Rourke crest," he explained, his voice low and raspy. "It tells every wolf in the room that if they touch you, they lose a hand. Do not take it off." Lizzie touched the cold metal. "Is this for protection or possession?" Kelsey met her eyes in the mirror. "With us, there is no difference." He offered her his arm. "Come. The wolves are hungry." The ballroom was a sea of velvet jewels and tension. The music was classical, but the energy was primal. As Kelsey led Lizzie down the grand staircase, the room went silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to them. Lizzie felt the weight of their stares. Curiosity, judgment, hunger. She gripped Kelsey's arm tighter. He covered her hand with his skin burning hot. "Chin up," he whispered. "Show them no fear." They moved through the crowd. Kelsey introduced her to allied alphas, but he never let go of her waist. He was marking her, enveloping her in his scent. Then the heavy double doors at the far end of the hall boomed open. A hush fell over the room that was different from before. It was the silence of fear. 5 men walked in. They wore dark suits and radiated malice. At the front was a man Lizzie knew better than her own reflection. Derek. He looked handsome in a cruel, sharp way, but his eyes were dead. He scanned the room until he landed on Lizzie. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He walked straight toward them, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Kelsey didn't move. He stood like a statue, his arm tightening around Lizzie so hard it almost bruised. "Alpha Rourke," Derek said, stopping 5 feet away. He didn't bow. "You throw a lovely party." "Beta Derek," Kelsey replied, his voice calm but laced with menace. You are not on the guest list. I'm here for my property, Derek said, his eyes flicking to Lizzie. Hello, darling. You look beautiful. That dress will look even better on my floor. Lizzie trembled, but Kelsey's grip grounded her. She is not property, Kelsey said, and she is not yours. Derek laughed, a cold, barking sound. She is a human who broke my laws. By the Treaty of 1998, you are required to extradite criminals back to their territory. Hand her over, Kelsey, or you break the treaty. The room held its breath. The treaty was sacred. Breaking it meant war, with all the packs, not just Obsidian. Kelsey released Lizzie's waist. He took a step forward, towering over Derek. The treaty applies to criminals, Kelsey said, his voice projecting to every corner of the silent ballroom. Lizzie Harper is not a criminal. She is under the protection of the ironclad pack. On what grounds? Derek sneered. She's a stray. On the grounds, Kelsey said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, that she is my mate. Gasps erupted around the room. Glasses shattered. Lizzie stared at Kelsey's back, shock paralyzing her. Mate Derek's face twisted into a snarl. She is human. You cannot mate with a human. It's an abomination. Fate decides not you, Kelsey challenged. He turned back to Lizzie, extending his hand. Come here. Lizzie stepped forward, placing her hand in his. Kelsey pulled her against his chest and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claim. It was fierce, consuming, and public. He kissed her until her knees buckled, and she had to cling to his lapels to stay upright. When he pulled back, his eyes were glowing, fully blue. He looked at Derek. She bears my scent. She wears my crest. She is the Luna of the ironclad pack. Touch her, and I will slaughter your entire bloodline. Derek looked at the surrounding alphas. He saw their expressions. They wouldn't interfere. You do not touch an alpha's mate. Derek took a step back, his face purple with rage. This isn't over, Rourke. A human Luna. Your own pack will tear her apart before the winter is out. He looked at Lizzie one last time. Sleep with one eye open, darling. Derek turned and stormed out, his entourage trailing behind him. The music started again, hesitant at first, then louder. Kelsey looked down at Lizzie. He looked shaken, as if the admission had cost him something. Did you mean it? Lizzie whispered, touching her swollen lips. Kelsey looked at her, the blue fading from his eyes, leaving them a stormy grey. I never say things I do not mean. You are mine, Lizzie. God help us both. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the ironclad estate. It only illuminated the cracks in the foundation. Kelsey's declaration at the ball had not been the romantic victory Lizzie might have read about in books. It had been a declaration of war, not just against Derek and the Obsidian pack, but against centuries of tradition within Kelsey's own kingdom. Breakfast was a silent, suffocating affair. Lizzie sat at the long mahogany table, picking at a plate of fruit. Kelsey sat at the head, reading a stack of documents with a scowl that deepened with every page. They're protesting, Lizzie said softly. It wasn't a question. Kelsey looked up, his eyes weary. Some of the older families are concerned. They believe a human Luna weakens the bloodline. They fear that our children... He stopped, clearing his throat, a faint flush rising on his neck. They fear our heirs would not be wolves. Lizzie set her fork down. The reality of her situation was settling in. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was a political liability. The heavy double doors swung open with a resounding boom. 3 elderly men walked in, wearing robes of heavy grey wool trimmed with fur. They were the council of elders, the keepers of the law. The leader, a man named Elder Gareth, with skin like parchment and eyes like flint, stopped at the foot of the table. He didn't bow. "Alpha Rourke," Gareth said, his voice dry and scratching. "The pack is restless. The patrols are reporting insubordination. The claim you made last night. It violates the sanctity of the blood." "The moon goddess chooses the mate Gareth," Kelsey said, his voice dangerously calm. "Not you, not the council, not the blood. The goddess does not make mistakes," Gareth countered, sneering at Lizzie. "But men do. Lust can be mistaken for destiny." Kelsey stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. "Careful, Elder. We demand the trial," Gareth announced. The room went deathly still. Even the servants froze against the walls. Kelsey's hands clenched into fists on the table. "She is human. The trial of Ash is meant for wolf-born warriors. It would kill her. If she is truly your mate, if she is truly meant to carry the future of this pack, the spirit of the forest will protect her," Gareth said. "If she is not, then the pack is cleansed of her weakness." "I refuse," Kelsey snarled. "Then you forfeit your title," Gareth said simply. "A king who breaks the sacred laws cannot lead. If you refuse the trial, the pack has the right to challenge you for the alpha position, and in your current state, distracted, lovesick, you might lose. Then what happens to her?" Lizzie watched the exchange. She saw the trap. If Kelsey refused, he lost his army, and Derek would kill them both. If he agreed, the forest would kill her. But Lizzie Harper had survived a blizzard. She had survived Derek. She looked at Kelsey, seeing the desperation in his eyes. He was ready to burn his kingdom down to keep her safe. She couldn't let him do that. "I'll do it," Lizzie said. Kelsey whipped his head around. "No." "What is the trial?" Lizzie asked Gareth, ignoring Kelsey. "You must walk the path of Ash," Gareth said, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "It is a 5-mile trek through the Deadwoods to the ancestral shrine. You will go alone. No weapons, no warm clothes, only the ceremonial tunic. If you return by dawn with the branch of the iron tree, you are Luna. If you do not, she will freeze to death in an hour," Kelsey roared. "Or the feral wolves in the Deadwoods will tear her apart." "I'll do it," Lizzie repeated louder this time. She stood up, her legs shaking, but her chin held high. "I survived the Yukon winter to get here. I'm harder to kill than I look." Kelsey moved to stop her, grabbing her arm. "Lizzie, this is suicide. The Deadwoods are haunted territory. Rogues and ferals live there." Lizzie looked into his electric blue eyes. She reached up and touched his cheek. "If I don't do this, they will never accept me. And they will never follow you. I won't be the reason you lose your crown, Kelsey." Kelsey stared at her agony, warring with pride in his expression. He realized then that she wasn't just a fragile human. She had the heart of an alpha. "If you are not back by sunrise," Kelsey whispered, "I will hunt down every single thing in that forest and kill it. And then I will kill the council." He turned to Gareth. "Prepare the gate. She walks at dusk." The Deadwoods lived up to their name. The trees here were black and twisted their branches interlocking overhead to block out the moonlight. The snow was grey with ash from a forest fire that had happened decades ago, and the air smelled of sulphur and rot. Lizzie was shivering violently. The ceremonial tunic was thin white linen, offering zero protection against the biting wind. Her feet were wrapped in leather strips, but she could feel the ice seeping through. She had been walking for 2 hours. Every shadow looked like a monster. Every snap of a twig sounded like a death sentence. Keep moving, she told herself. Left at the split rock. Right at the frozen creek. She had a map in her head, memorized from the quick briefing Rogan had given her before she left. Kelsey had been banned from seeing her before the trial, forced to stay in the Great Hall with the elders, to ensure he didn't intervene. Lizzie stumbled over a root, scraping her hands on the frozen earth. She bit back a cry. The scent of fresh blood would attract predators. She pushed herself up and froze. Ahead of her in the center of the path stood a figure. It wasn't a wolf. It was a man. He was wearing modern tactical gear, thermal camouflage heavy boots, and night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. This wasn't part of the trial. The trial was about nature, not mercenaries. The man unholstered a knife. Sorry, sweetheart. Strictly business. Lizzie scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who are you? Gareth sends his regards. The mercenary smirked. He figured the cold might be too slow. Wanted to make sure the Alpha King becomes a widower tonight. Betrayal. The elder hadn't just set her up to fail. He had set her up to be executed. Lizzie turned and ran. She didn't run along the path. She dove into the dense, thorny underbrush. The thorns tore at her tunic and skin, but she didn't stop. You can't outrun me, the mercenary called out, laughing. She could hear his heavy boots crunching the snow getting closer. Lizzie wasn't trying to outrun him. She was heading for the ravine. She remembered the map. The Devil's Drop. A steep incline leading down to a frozen river. It was suicide to go down it, but it was death to stay up here. She burst through the tree line and skidded to a halt at the edge of the cliff. It was a 50-foot drop into darkness. The mercenary emerged from the trees 10 yards behind her. End of the line, Luna. Lizzie looked at him, then at the drop. For you, she gasped. She didn't jump. She dropped to the ground, grabbed a handful of the ash and dirt, and flung it into the wind. The gust caught the debris, blowing it straight into the mercenary's face. He cursed, rubbing his eyes for a split second. In that second, Lizzie tackled him. She didn't have wolf strength, but she had leverage. She hit him at the knees. He toppled backward, surprised by the assault. He hit the icy ground, sliding toward the edge. He grabbed her tunic, dragging her with him. They both went over. Lizzie screamed as they tumbled down the rocky slope. The world was a blur of pain ice and stone. She hit a ledge, the impact knocking the wind out of her, but the mercenary kept falling, bouncing off the rocks until he hit the ice below with a sickening crack. Lizzie lay on the narrow ledge, gasping for air. Her arm was twisted at a wrong angle. Her head was spinning. She looked up. She was trapped halfway down a cliff in freezing temperatures. Kelsey, she whispered into the dark. Oh, back in the great hall. Kelsey Rourke dropped his wine glass. It shattered red wine, staining the white rug like blood. He clutched his chest, a sudden blinding when piercing his heart. Alpha, Rogan asked, stepping forward. Kelsey's eyes flashed not blue, but a terrifying, solid black. The wolf was taking over. She is hurt, Kelsey growled, his voice vibrating the windows. She is bleeding. Elder Gareth stood up, feigning concern. It is the trial, Alpha. Pain is part of the process. You cannot interfere. Kelsey turned to Gareth. He moved so fast he was a blur. In a heartbeat, he had the elder pinned against the stone wall, his feet dangling off the ground. This isn't the cold, Kelsey roared, spittle flying onto the old man's face. "I feel fear. I feel malice. Someone is in there with her." "That's impossible," Gareth choked out. "The perimeter is sealed." "If she dis," Kelsey whispered the sound more terrifying than his shout, "I will start the killing with you." He dropped the elder and sprinted for the doors. "Kelsey!" "The barrier," Rogan shouted. "If you cross the barrier during the trial, you break the law." "Then I break the law," Kelsey shouted back, shifting mid-stride. Bones cracked and reshaped. By the time he hit the snow outside, he was no longer a man. He was the great black wolf, a monster of shadow and rage, tearing toward the deadwoods faster than any vehicle could travel. He could smell her. He could smell her fear, her blood, and the scent of gunpowder. Gunpowder. A howl ripped from his throat, a sound of pure fury that made every wolf in a 10-mile radius cower in submission. He reached the cliff edge in minutes. His enhanced vision saw the drag marks. He saw the body of the mercenary on the ice below. And he saw the small white-clad figure huddled on the ledge, slowly freezing to death. Kelsey didn't hesitate. He leaped over the edge, sliding down the rock face with impossible agility, digging his claws into the stone to slow his descent. He landed on the ledge beside her. Lizzie looked up, her eyelashes frosted with ice. She was barely conscious. When she saw the massive black wolf, she didn't flinch. She smiled weakly. "You came," she whispered. Kelsey whined a heartbroken sound. He shifted back, ignoring the cold against his naked skin. He scooped her up into his arms, pulling her against his blazing chest heat. "I will always come," Kelsey swore. "Look at me, Lizzie. Stay with me." "There was a man," Lizzie mumbled, her head lolling against his shoulder. "He said Gareth sent him." Kelsey froze. The rage that filled him then was cold, calculated. "Gareth," he said the name tasting like ash. He looked at Lizzie's broken arm and her blue lips. The trial was over. The politics were over. "Rogan!" Kelsey bellowed into the night, knowing his beta was following close behind. Rogan appeared at the top of the cliff, breathless. "Alpha!" "Get the medical team," Kelsey commanded, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "And then lock the Great Hall. No one leaves." He looked down at the mercenary's body on the ice. "Bring the body," Kelsey added darkly. "We have evidence. Tonight the council falls." He held Lizzie tighter, climbing back up the cliff, with one arm driven by a strength that came from the bond. The pack wanted a monster. He would show them a monster. But Lizzie would be their queen. The great hall was silent save for the crackling of the fire. The council of elders sat around the long table, their expressions a mix of anxiety and smug satisfaction. They were waiting for a death knell. They expected a report that the human girl had succumbed to the cold, freeing the ironclad pack from the embarrassment of a weak Luna. Instead, the massive oak doors exploded inward. Splinters of wood rained down on the stone floor. Standing in the jagged opening was Kelsey Rourke. He was shirtless, his chest heaving, his skin streaked with ash and dried blood. But it was what he carried that sucked the air out of the room. Lizzie lay limp in his arms, wrapped in his tuxedo jacket. Her arm was splintered with a branch, and her skin was pale as moonlight, but the faint rise and fall of her chest proved she was alive. Kelsey didn't walk. He stalked. He moved toward the head of the table, the aura of power rolling off him so intense that the candles flickered and died, leaving the room illuminated only by the firelight and the glowing blue of his eyes. Alpha, Elder Gareth stammered, standing up. You broke the rules. You entered the Deadwoods. And you, Kelsey said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated in the listeners' chests, broke the covenant. Rogan the Beta marched in behind Kelsey. He dragged a heavy body bag across the floor, leaving a wet trail of melting snow. With a grunt, Rogan hoisted the bag onto the pristine dining table right in front of Gareth. He unzipped it. The mercenary's frozen, battered face stared up at the ceiling. "We found this filth on the path," Kelsey said, gently, placing Lizzie into a chair near the fire and covering her with a fur throw. He turned back to the council, his movement predatory. He was carrying a tactical knife and military-grade night vision, and he had a burner phone. Rogan held up a plastic bag containing the shattered phone. Technicians pulled the last received text message. It was sent 5 minutes before the trial began. Rogan read the text aloud, his voice echoing in the hall. "The target walks at dusk. Make it look like an accident. Payment is in the usual account. G." Every eye in the room turned to Gareth. The elder's face went grey. "It's a lie. A fabrication. Is it?" Kelsey walked slowly toward Gareth. "You didn't just try to kill my mate, Gareth. You conspired with an outsider. This man is a freelancer, but his bank accounts trace back to shell companies owned by the Obsidian Shadow Pack. You're working with Derek." Gasps of horror erupted from the other elders. To kill a Luna was treason. To work with a rival pack was heresy. "He promised peace," Gareth shrieked, backing away until he hit the wall. "Derek promised that if we handed over the girl and removed you, he would leave our borders alone. You are reckless, Kelsey. You are bringing war to our doorstep. For a human." "No," Kelsey said, stopping inches from the trembling old man. "I am bringing justice." Kelsey's hand shot out, grabbing Gareth by the throat. He lifted the man off the ground, as if he weighed nothing. "A king protects his own," Kelsey snarled. "You sold us out to a murderer." "Mercy," Gareth gargled, clawing at Kelsey's wrist. "The trial of Ash demands a sacrifice," Kelsey whispered, cold and hard. "You wanted a death in the woods tonight. You shall have one." Kelsey threw Gareth toward the open doors. "Rogan, take him to the darkest cell. He lives until Derek arrives. I want Derek to see what happens to traitors before I rip his throat out." Rogan nodded grimly, signaling the guards to drag the screaming elder away. Kelsey turned back to the room. The remaining elders bowed their heads low, exposing their necks in submission. The challenge was over. The king had returned. Lizzie woke to the smell of lavender and the feeling of silk sheets. Her arm throbbed with a dull ache, and her head felt heavy, but she was warm. She opened her eyes. She was back in Kelsey's room. "You're awake." Kelsey was sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked different. The wild, bloody warrior from the woods was gone, replaced by the composed alpha, though the shadows under his eyes spoke of a long vigil. "Did I pass?" Lizzie croaked, her throat dry. Kelsey smiled, a genuine, soft expression that transformed his harsh face. He reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "You survived an assassin, a 50-foot drop, and the freezing cold. You didn't just pass, Lizzie. You conquered." "The assassin handled," Kelsey said darkly, "and the man who sent him is rotting in a cell." He took her uninjured hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I almost lost you. when I felt your pain through the bond. I have never known fear like that." Lizzie squeezed his hand. "I wasn't afraid. I knew you were coming." "I will always come for you," Kelsey vowed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a ring made of black iron, set with a raw, uncut diamond that seemed to glow with an inner light. "This isn't just a ring," Kelsey said. "It is the iron band of the Rourke line. It has been worn by every Lunar for 300 years. It is said to bind the wearer's soul to the pack." He looked at her, his blue eyes vulnerable. "I cannot promise you an easy life, Lizzie. Derek is still out there. War is coming. But I can promise you that you will never fight alone again. Will you stand with me? Not as a guest, not as a witness, but as my queen." Lizzie looked at the ring, then at the man who had walked through hell to find her. She thought of the wolf cub, Toby, who was currently snoring on the rug by the fire. She thought of the way the pack had looked at Kelsey in the hall with awe and respect. She wasn't running anymore. She had found her place. "Yes," Lizzie whispered. Kelsey slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. As the metal touched her skin, a jolt of energy rushed through her. It wasn't painful. It was warm and grounding. She could feel him. She could feel his strength, his protectiveness, and the deep, abiding love that anchored his wolf soul. Kelsey leaned in and kissed her, sealing the bond. Outside the window, the sun began to rise over the iron-clad territory, turning the snow from grey to blinding gold. Far away at the southern border, a howl ripped through the air. It was Derek signaling his troops. The war had begun. Kelsey broke the kiss, looking toward the window. His eyes flashed blue. "Let him come," Kelsey whispered, pulling Lizzie against his chest. "We are ready." Lizzie Harper, the human waitress who had saved a cub, rested her head against the Alpha King's heart. She closed her eyes, no longer a victim, but the Lunar of the ironclad. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the wolves. She was leading them. And that is the story of how Lizzie Harper went from a runaway waitress to the queen of the wolves. She proved that you don't need claws to be fierce. Sometimes you just need the heart to save a monster's family. But the story isn't over yet. Derek is still gathering his army at the border, and the war for the ironclad territory is just beginning. What do you think will happen next? Will the Obsidian Pack break through the defenses? And what other secrets is the Council hiding? If you want to hear part 2 and find out if Kelsey and Lizzie survive the coming war, make sure to hit that like button. Let's aim for 5,000 likes. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next episode of this Alpha Romance saga. Comment Team Ironclad below if you're rooting for Kelsey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.